afternoon, JCPS. Welcome and thank you for joining us for a special episode with our partners from UK NextGen. We will have joining us Lou Young, who is the Executive Director, Justin Bathon, who is Director of NextGen Scholars, and Karen Perry, who is our Director of Digital Learning and Network Partnerships. A little bit about UK NextGen. Of course, their work is to help school and district leaders implement deeper and more personalized learning with an eye toward equity for all learners. In the last few months, UK NextGen has been working with educators to reflect on what they've learned during the crisis and how this learning can help us move closer to transformation in the future. And I've heard so many principals yesterday and today talking about how school is going to look different in JCPS when we get back, which I think is so exciting. So their session today, Don't Put Genie Back in the Bottle, is designed to engage us in an important conversation about learning that is happening across JCPS, Kentucky, and our nation. So I'm going to hand it over to UK NextGen. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Susan. It's been awesome to work with JCPS. This is the end of our fourth year working directly with JCPS on moving towards next generation learning and leadership practices. And it's been a great journey together. So we're going to have Lou joining us, we hope, in a few minutes, and then also potentially a student from Fayette County who was part of a session that we hosted last week as part of a big national conversation. And so we thought with the 30 minutes that we had with you all today, we would share some of what emerged from that big national conversation as we begin to sort of think about, not putting the genie back in the bottle, as this session is titled. So I'll share slides. Is that okay? I think I can share slides. Does that sound right to you guys?
Yes, Matt? You can. Yep.
While Justin's doing that, I'll just give a little bit more context. Last week, we were in a national conversation called A New Way Forward. That was really a conversation that was about, we're in this period of time now that's just been super disruptive to school generally. And so what are we going to do to figure a new way forward? What is school going to look like? Reflecting on what we're learning right now, but what should school look like when we return, not to regular business as usual, but to a new approach to learning. So the national conversation was what kind of spurred our thinking, and also our thinking and our discussions that we've had with educators all over Kentucky, doing the good work of figuring this out right now on behalf of kids in Kentucky. So the idea, the title of Not Putting Genie Back in the Bottle was really a nod to the idea that this period of disruption in education has let the traditional genie out of the bottle, and we really can't go back to what it has been. So one of the questions that we really want to be thinking about today are what are the elements of learning that shouldn't go back to what it was. And so what are we learning now that informed our thinking about moving forward is really the center point of our discussion today.
So as Karen said, we've been working on this new way forward. A couple of partners we want to give shout outs to are Pam Moran and Ira Sokol. They are educators from the University from Albemarle County in Virginia, and they were working with us on this national presentation that we're beginning to share. Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing, Heather. I think that's starting to come in. And so this sort of was where we wanted to start the discussion today. And we also want to tee up, we know there's a chat going on for everyone that's listening. What about this? What about learning right now do we not want to put back in the bottle? And so if you all can give comments to that chat, we're going to be keeping an eye on that. I know Susan Price is keeping an eye on that chat and giving some responses. So we sort of want to hear from you too about what's going on as we pull out some things nationally that have been discussed on our front. Oh, hey, Natalia, good to see you. So Natalia, we'll have you set up for just a couple of minutes here. So can you jump forward 2 slides, Heather? Yep, one more. Okay, super. So on this particular slide, we want to show you sort of like what we want to reflect on, our current objectives around NTI, what's working, what's not working there. We're going to hear from Natalia, who just joined, who's a student in Fayette County, about her experiences, share some of our brainstorming, and begin to consider sort of the takeaways that we take with us into the education system in August and moving forward that we sort of want to preserve coming out of this pandemic. So jump to the next one, and Karen, I'm going to turn to you on that one.
Yep. So our big questions for today are really, what have your kids discovered about learning? What are you discovering about learning? This period of disruption has sort of shaken us out of our sort of status quo, keep on trucking, particularly here in the spring where we would all just be holding on for dear life anyway. But we've been shaken out of our element a little bit. So we want to hear from you and from Natalia, and have a discussion about what are your kids discovering about learning and what are you discovering about learning from this disruption. So if we could go ahead and go to the next slide. So the first place I want to start is really with the student perspective, which is where we should always start, right? So question first to Natalia. Natalia, what are you learning about being a student in this kind of remote environment? What's working for you? What's not working for you? And let me just give actually, before you start, Natalia, a little bit of introduction. Natalia is a senior in Fayette County. She's at a school called the STEAM Academy. And she does a little bit of work with the NextGen team, but she has a real unique perspective on the learning experience that we wanted to share with you all, and just bring in a student voice. So Natalia, what are you learning about being a student in this environment? What's working? What's not working? We'll throw it over to you.
Thank you. I'm learning a lot about myself and about what I learn with BEST, what type of learning styles I learn from BEST. And I think that's what a lot of students and my peers are doing, is that we're learning about how we learn and what's best for us and what in this structure is working and what isn't working. Some students don't work well with online work, and they work better when they can be in class and function with teachers and can see face to face. I'm one of those. But I'm also learning to take responsibility for my time management and just learn to be more adaptable to situations, which is something that all students can really learn from. So this is a nice environment to be pushed into. We're also getting to see a side of teachers that we haven't seen before, because they're more understanding of our circumstances because they're living in them now, and they realize that home life can be a lot more challenging than they realize. And so our excuses become explanations, and we're just overall more connected to our teachers than we had been.
Natalia, you are so tweetable, honestly. What had been viewed as excuses is now viewed as explanations, I think is a very humane approach. And I think you're right. All of our resilience and persistence are being tested right now in this new environment. So really appreciate your perspective.'re going to come back to you and dig into that a little bit more. But before we move on, can you just give us an example of why it's important, or tell us why it's important to understand your teachers a little bit more? You mentioned this giving you an opportunity to view your teachers in a slightly different light, but why is that important to you?
It's very important to me because you have to realize how much teachers are adjusting just as we are, and that it makes them seem more human rather than just the people who are supposed to give us what we're supposed to learn, rather than there's people who are also working in a system that they may be struggling with too. It just gives everyone a more humane look to everything and more understandable of everyone else's circumstances. So there's not as many students pushing and pulling at teachers, and we're more patient with them if we have a problem and they take a minute to get back to us, because they're taking emails from everyone, solving everyone's problems right now.
Super interesting. And I would just say, I think I can speak on behalf of teachers everywhere and say that we appreciate you all being patient with us as we figure things out too. It really just, this compassion has to go both ways as we're all figuring out this whole scene. Super interesting. Okay, we're definitely going to come back to you. But the next question I want to ask was originally going to be for Lou, but she's having trouble joining us. I think she might be in the chat. But Justin, can I throw this question over to you while we're waiting for Lou to get in or respond to the chat? Based on your observations with across Kentucky and the country, what are you learning about learning spaces and workspaces and equity?
Yeah, so clearly we have a lot of inequity. As home has become place-based learning, that's really a new place for learning. The reliance that we have on everyone's homes as places of learning really bring out, like, what does home mean to you? And we are seeing some inequities there. There are just a lot of questions about space in our world right now. The thought of going back to classrooms with 30 students in a room together in terms of space is another really interesting question about how we've designed spaces in schools over time. Clearly, the spaces we've designed in schools are not sort of well designed to keep viruses at a minimum. So there's just a lot of space questions, a lot of equity sort of embedded in those space questions. And obviously I'm going to speak to technology in just a minute. Even in those spaces, what's the availability of access to communication tools in those spaces? So a lot we're learning there. The flip side, the positives are home is clearly proving a space for some degree of learning for some kids. And while we have not mastered the equity questions inside of that, home as place-based learning, I think, has a new future that we didn't know it had coming out of this pandemic. I'll give you for instance, the Pritchard Committee right now, a statewide organization educationally here in Kentucky, has shifted a bunch of its parent outreach from sort of trying to do the parent as leaders, serve on SBDM council kind of work, to parents as leaders of learning. And that's a new place for us to be, and potentially a good place for us to explore more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just so much for us to learn about how to really reach out to kids in these sort of new learning circumstances. That really leads us to the next slide, which is what have you seen that worries you or gives you hope about kids we're having a hard time reaching? And I'll take that one. It's always been the case that even kids who are present in our classrooms, sometimes we have a hard time connecting with those kids. I think what I've seen here across Kentucky and across the country is sort of a redoubling at the effort to try to reach students that are sometimes hard to reach. On the positive, I've seen kids who have the kind of freedom that Natalia mentioned really grow in this kind of environment. We're hearing about kids who appreciate being able to make their own schedules and set their own time. And so they're able to respond to the academic challenges in front of them a little bit more at their own pace and in their own way. So that's really hopeful to me. What's worrisome to me are the kids that we either can't reach at all because of technology or because of they're just not engaging, or maybe they're struggling with health situations or dire financial circumstances in their home. And that really worries me a lot. And I think it makes it clear to me that when we do return to school in some kind of mix of face-to-face or a new school year, we need to make sure we're building up the infrastructure, not only for social emotional learning, but actually outreach to all kids across our districts and across our state of Kentucky. I think sometimes we take a little bit for granted that kids are sitting in seats and they're going to show up. If not today, if we don't reach them today, then we'll reach them tomorrow. But I don't know that we should keep making that assumption. So that worries me a little bit. And of course, back to Justin's point about equity, I'm worried a little bit about a lot actually about kids who don't have access to technology and the infrastructure, the Wi-Fi and all of the access that they need to keep learning if we do keep moving back and forth from face-to-face to remote learning. So that's
some shout outs to chat. I've been watching the chat a little bit and want to get some chat. First, Natalia, of course, is getting lots of love in chat. Natalia, as always, is a star. And
Always.
so thanks for joining us, Natalia. And if you all have questions for Natalia, you can put them in chat and we can just ask her here directly. Shout out to Lindsay, who talks about the increased humanity that we are seeing right now on all sides, and as a real sort of strength of what's happening right now. Just want to give a few shout outs into the chat. So we're watching and paying attention over there. Lou has now joined by chat and is answering questions there as well. So feel free to be asking us questions over there as we proceed forward. So next phase for us. Okay, want to go next phase?
Yeah, go ahead. So tell us about the provocation that we are kind of grappling with, and then what we did. So let's go next slide.
All right. Yep. Heather, jump back in. So in order to do this kind of work, so I've been sort of teaching online for the last decade. And so doing sort of online teaching and provocations and all kinds of stuff is really fun for me. We found out that we were going to do this national presentation with like 2 days to go before we had to do it in this big national conference called A New Way Forward, which I think had several thousand people there. So I just sort of gave a provocation to the community, and jump a slide forward, around, what could school be instead? Based off of the learning that's happening right now during this pandemic, what could school be? And so, Heather, jump one more ahead, and I just want to show you how we did it. We ran a live Google Excel sheet to gather data in breakout groups with about 10 people per breakout group. We then fed that all into a Lotus Blossom image that sort of pulls together all the ideas that emerged. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pose some questions with the 10 minutes we have left, pose a few questions and show you like the one big takeaway from that conversation. Also, as we pose the questions, you can be answering them for yourself in chat, and we'll be watching over there and giving some feedback. Good?
Yeah. So as Justin said, we broke out. So we had this big old, couple hundred people in our session maybe. And then we broke out into smaller groups. Just so you know, this Lotus Blossom activity, we're going to give you the link to it with directions so that you could replicate this in your own classroom, your own online environment if you'd like to. But as Justin said, we started out all together in a big group. We broke out into small groups around the question of pretty much what do we need to make sure that we're sort of bringing forward into the next version of learning in the next school year. So when we broke out into all these breakout groups, the original Lotus design is to have 8 breakout groups, but we didn't have that. We only had 6, but it's still pretty flexible.
So jump forward one more, Heather. Sorry. Thank you, Heather, for helping accommodate us.
That's right. Thanks for running the slides. So first of all, over on the left-hand side of the slide, there's a link to the Lotus Blossom activity. It's got directions. It's got blank versions of this. Heather or Matt, are they going to be able to access the hyperlinks in the deck? Can we share the deck with them?
We can share the deck. I also just put into the live chat on YouTube the link to the Lotus Blossom, so I'll put some more links in there as well.
Great. Smart. Okay. So good. So when we broke up into these little breakout groups in our room, my breakout group was the first one, the top left yellow one, which is about learner autonomy. So what are we learning about learner autonomy? And what are the things that we need to keep doing or do more of to bring learner autonomy forward? So Heather, if you'll go 2 slides ahead to the Lotus Blossom tool. So what we did was we put our groups into a shared Google Doc, and we just brainstormed together for 10 minutes about what are all the high student autonomy ideas that we can bring forward into Learning Next. So we had great discussion there around student choices, and really similar to actually we shared the choice board work from JCPS with everyone, talked about project-based learning, talked about engaging activities, talk about student passion projects, high agency or high learner autonomy choices that do lots to motivate students and that can be done in a remote sort of setting, but would also benefit from some face-to-face facilitation. So we had everybody dump their ideas into this spreadsheet. We put resources, good people to follow on Twitter, all of that. And then, Heather, if you could go one more slide forward for us, we decided that our very best idea that we wanted to bring forward was a commitment to project-based learning. So we talked a little bit about the importance of having authentic, real-world problem solving with students, making substantive decisions about that learning experience. And so PBL, commitment to PBL, was something that we wanted to bring forward and contribute to learning experiences moving forward. So that was my little section of the Lotus Blossom. When we came back together, we shared that out more collectively.
Let's jump forward to a blue question. So on this blue question, we sort of asked about, what must change about technology use? And we don't have to rehash this because everything about the JCPS Digital Learning Channel is about this question. And so if you're watching JCPS Digital Learning at any moment other than now, you're learning what must change about technology use. But one more forward, Heather, what we really wanted to push on coming out of this was around minimum statewide equities with technology. That one thing we have learned really clearly through this pandemic is that we do not have statewide equity when it comes to how much access kids are getting to communication tools that are proving absolutely vital during this pandemic. But those communication tools have always been vital. Access to the internet is a right these days. Access to information is a right these days. And so we as an education system coming out of this need to push really hard on sort of minimum equitable expectations for technology use, both at school and at home. So that was our big takeaway around the technology one. And again, interested as we discuss these, what your thoughts are over in chat. And Lou and Susan are over there in chat, and I'm trying to keep up as much as I can. So you can help answer these questions for us too.
So, Heather, if we can go to the next one, and the next part of the Lotus was really a discussion about assessment. Lou led this little breakout group about how might assessment need to change in a more student-centered environment. And so if you could just show us the next slide, there was lots of good discussion there about the role of assessment and what assessment might look like in a more student-centered environment. Really good ideas about how kids can help co-create what their assessments are, how it's important for us to be assessing the soft skills like the JCPS backpack skills, less dependence, of course, on state testing or eliminating state testing. The idea that kids should be presenting, and there's tons of valuable learning that happens through that whole process because of the meaningful and actionable feedback that comes back from that. So next generation assessment, their best idea that came out of that, and one that sort of ties it all together, is the idea that kids can help co-create and co-construct what their assessment looks like. And we really believe that JCPS is on to really good work with the JCPS backpack as you all continue to refine that practice moving forward. So I'm looking at the time thinking,
Natalia's still with us.
Yeah, let's ask Natalia a question.
We've got a couple minutes left. So Natalia, you got to take part in this big national conversation and see a bunch of educators come up with these ideas. What resonated with you as a learner during this process as one thing that you definitely want educators to take away from this process?
Well, the thing that I really liked that everyone was talking about was equity, and they were really thinking about how kids don't have all the same access. I remember very vividly before the quarantine happened that a kid I knew, we were given an assignment that had to be done at home, and it was an online assignment, but he didn't have access to anything internet-wise, and he had no transportation for it, and he was given a 0 because he wasn't able to do the work. And now that we're in a situation like this that forces teachers to realize not everyone can do everything, and they have to make other access points for them to be able to do their work, it's something that we prioritized, and I want that to happen. I want people to have access to the information and knowledge that I have access to, and maybe even more, because maybe they need a laptop or something like that, but not everybody has that, and that's really discouraging when you're doing your work and you can't do it like everyone else can, and your solutions aren't as simple. So
yeah, powerful, and thank you. It speaks to the really high level conversation we got to have with these educators across the country, and I hope that and just watching the comments from the JCPS digital learning channel, I really think everyone's heads are much more focused on equity now that the pandemic has really laid bare so much of the inequity in our systems.